Why don't we shift gears a little bit and talk about herbal career paths? I know you got some thoughts
Sure.
on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm biased, and I'm curious if you have other questions about it. I'm a little bit biased in part because I chose to, again, take this really conventional path. Uh, I studied herbs. I did first aid, wilderness first responder, did an EMT training class, finished EMT training with my certification, and realized I was already making more at farmers market than I would working as an EMT.
Mm.
So I never ended up using
Wow.
that. And but it was actually through these protest experiences where I realized that I was constantly in these situations where we needed a doctor, either because we had somebody with really complex, serious medical issues going on. For example, that time in New Orleans, we had all these people that had really severe underlying diabetes or hypertension, and they were coming in with blood pressures that we couldn't even measure because they were so high, or they needed insulin. And we were really fortunate. We actually traveled there with a psychiatrist
Mm.
who didn't, hadn't really practiced internal medicine since residency, but he had a license. And so he could write the prescriptions, and the people could drive over into Texas and get their meds. And it was one of these kind of, okay, this, maybe I need to do this thing so that I can help more people than just either beyond what just herbs can do. Because these were folks that, hawthorn and passion flower and motherwort probably weren't going to be enough to bring their hypertension down to a safe realm where they weren't going to have a stroke or a heart attack. So that's when I started the whole medical school path. But it was a tough choice. I actually explored doing a master's entry nurse practitioner program, which I think for people who have some background and experience, but maybe are not young enough to want to go through the time and expense of med school, or need a little more flexibility in their work-life balance. I think doing nursing or nurse practitioner or physician's assistant are really, really good ways to become a healthcare professional where you can get a job, where you can serve people that can only afford the healthcare that's covered by their insurance. And I think in the world of even conventional medicine, there are so many ways now that you can practice in an integrative manner that you don't have to necessarily fall in the box. I had chips on my shoulder, multiple chips on my shoulder about those other career paths. And so I went the doctor route, for better or for worse. There's been many times where I wish I'd just done a nursing program because I went through med school with kids and running a business. And it's been a huge amount of debt, and it took up a decade of my life to do the training. Yeah. But I wouldn't go back at this point.
Right.
But I have a lot of people ask me, what should they do? I've studied herbs, so now I really want to figure out how I can either serve more people, or how can I figure out how to actually make a decent living, because I'm not that interested in being an entrepreneur. And those are folks, because you kind of you have to hang your shingle and figure out how to make it work, whether you're a clinician or making products or both. So I usually steer people towards a degree that has some conventional value where you could possibly go out and get a job. If people who love being self-employed, people who are super, super self-motivated and definitely don't want a boss, don't want to deal with BS, don't want to deal with insurance billing, don't want to deal with any of that stuff, then exploring things like naturopathy or acupuncture, I think are really, really good options. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with them at all. But it's much harder to go out and get a job with those. And if you're like me, you grew up poor and you just knew that you needed that for your own rock of certainty, I knew that doing something a little more conventional is going to help provide me with that for myself as well. Hence I have a day job so I can farm. My dad was a farmer and didn't make much money, so I knew that I didn't want to do that professionally.
Right. Yeah. My friend just became a nurse, and I watched him go through years of trying to get into nursing school. But you know what? After a few years, he finally made it in, and now he's doing it. And he finds, he's not an herbalist, but he finds it to be an incredibly rewarding career path. And I never really thought about it the way that you're putting it. Why not get a very conventional job to kind of subsidize your side gig as an herbalist or whatnot? And some of the best herbalists I know are like nurse/herbalists. And in fact, you might have even worked with one in New Orleans. Did you work with a Wendy in New Orleans?
Possibly.
Okay.
Probably.
Yeah, she was there.
It was a minute ago.
Sure. Yeah, there was a whole
Time flies. It was a minute ago.
herbal, crew down there for the whole Hurricane Katrina situation. Yeah. And but yeah, I just love the whole nurse herbalist. I think it's a really well balanced approach.
The other thing is that you can't go wrong with getting the science training that you get in nursing and or any of these other training programs. I mean, there are a lot of herb schools teach anatomy and physiology, and they do a good job, but you might as well, especially if you can do those classes at a community college. I mean, I'm not going to, if you want to spend your money on an herb school that offers those, that's awesome. But you also might be able to get that part of your education at, I went to community college at Cabrillo College in Aptos, SoCal near Santa Cruz. Each course cost me about $100 plus books and stuff. It was absolutely phenomenal. And the education was better than my fancy East Coast big university because they were small classes. They were taught by the professors. Everybody was there because they were there because they wanted to learn the material instead of because it was some major requirement. And so I got to do anatomy and physiology, and I did all that there even before med school as part of the nursing program. And having that, I teach a lot of red flags classes for herbalists. I teach a lot of conventional health information for herbalists because I think if you're going to put yourself out there as somebody who's helping people clinically, you need to have a really big scope of knowledge.
Yeah.
It's a really big responsibility. You don't necessarily need to go to med school.
Right.
It takes a particular person who loves to work hard and doesn't mind agony and doesn't need a lot of sleep to go through that. But I think that having a really solid science background and understanding of human anatomy and physiology is really important to being a responsible herbalist.
Yeah, and I'll second your community college recommendation. I actually took anatomy and physiology at LCC here in Eugene, and the teacher was amazing. I picked up I still remember some of the stuff to this day, and that was probably 15 years ago. So, yeah, community college, good recommendation.
Yeah, and then I don't think that the other plug that I would say is that I think right now there is a huge lack of mental health care providers, and there's a lot of opportunities it's a very long path and very hard work to become a MSW or LCSW, so a licensed therapist. But the number of people that need mental health care right now is so tremendous after the past few years, especially with kids and teens. Anybody who's thinking about, especially if you're interested in nerve healings and how herbs affect the mind and the mood, and you care about helping people, that's another career pathway. There are some very strict areas around licensure about what you can and can't do depending on your state, but it is a really amazing way to help people with or without herbs.
Good choice. Okay. Do you have any advice for running a clinical practice?
I don't run my own clinical practice. I work in a community health center. I have a doctor job. And so I already run one business. I have no interest in running another one.
That's fair.
If you do run a clinical practice, I would seek professional mentorship in how to get all your forms set up. I would try to use EMR where you have electronic records, get all your, consent forms, everything, get it streamlined, get it so that it's all integrated into an electronic system, and make sure that it's all vetted and make sure that you have insurance.
Well, you still had some recommendations, so there you go.
Yeah.